The sun blazed upon the battlefield of the Philistines. The giant Goliath, once a terror to Israel, lay dead, his massive sword and armour stripped, his body lifeless in the dust. And there stood David, the shepherd boy from Bethlehem, his face smeared with dirt and triumph. The people shouted his name, and in that moment a legend was born. Among those watching was Jonathan, son of King Saul, the crown prince of Israel, a warrior known for his own courage. He had faced Philistine armies before and seen God deliver victory, but this was different. As he listened to David speak to his father Saul, recounting how the Lord gave him victory over lions, bears, and finally the giant, something stirred deep in Jonathan's heart. Scripture says, "The soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul." From that day, they became more than friends. They became brothers in spirit. Jonathan took off his royal robe and gave it to David, along with his sword, bow, and belt. It was more than a gift. It was a sign of covenant. In that act, the heir to the throne was saying, "I honour you. I see God's hand on you. I am with you." After David slayed Goliath, Saul didn't let him return to his family in Bethlehem. Saul wanted to keep him close, and so he did. David went wherever King Saul sent him and behaved himself wisely. Saul set him over his army, and he was accepted in everyone's sight. David's fame grew quickly. Everywhere he went, the Lord gave him victory. Songs filled the streets of Israel, specifically sang by women. Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. The melody was sweet to the people's ears, but poison to Saul's heart. Imagine being king and all your subjects sing praises to one of your subjects instead of to you. From that day, Saul looked at David with envy and suspicion. He tried to keep David close, but his jealousy only grew. One evening, as David played the harp to soothe Saul's troubled spirit, a dark rage came over the king. He hurled his spear at David, missing him by inches. The young man escaped, but the trust between them was shattered. The whole of Israel loved David because he brought them many victories, but Saul was afraid of him. Saul then promised his elder daughter Merab to David, because David was so well behaved, and he said to David, "Take my daughter, and all I require from you is that you be valiant for me and fight all the battles." David said to Saul, "Who am I that I should be son-in-law to the king?" But when the time came for David to marry Saul's daughter Merab, she was given to someone else. But luckily, Saul's other daughter, Michal, loved David. Saul was pleased when he heard his other daughter loved David, and he was happy to give her to David, but not for the reasons you'd think. He wanted her to be a trap for David. He knew what David would say, and as predicted, David said, "I'm a poor man. How am I supposed to pay the dowry of a princess?" Saul then took the opportunity to say, "I don't want anything from you, except that you win my battles and slay Philistines for me." David agreed to this because this was something doable for him, but Saul's plan was to put David at the mercy of the Philistines in battle. However, David was triumphant in every battle he fought, and it angered Saul even more. Saul wanted to kill David and would throw spears at David in an attempt to kill him, but he'd miss. Jonathan, torn between his father Saul and his friend David, could sense the danger building. He pleaded with Saul, "Let not the king sin against his servant David, for he has not sinned against you." And for a moment Saul relented. David was restored to court, but peace was short-lived. Once again, Saul's jealousy burned. He sent men to watch David's house, ready to kill him by morning. David fled into the night, his wife Michal helping him escape through a window. Left behind, David's wife Michal would dress the bed as if David was still around to keep up appearances, whenever the king's guards came to search for him. Her father sent his guards to kill David, and when they went to his house, Michal told them he was sick, but Saul insisted, saying, "Bring him on his sickbed to me, so that I may kill him myself." But when the guards returned to David's house and searched thoroughly, they found out he'd been gone all along. Alone, hunted, the hero of Israel became a fugitive. David found Jonathan and poured out his heart. "What have I done? What is my crime that your father wants to kill me?" Jonathan refused to believe it. "Far be it! My father tells me everything. He would not hide this from me." But David insisted, "Your father knows that you favour me. That's why he keeps this from you. As surely as the Lord lives, there is only a step between me and death." Jonathan's heart broke. He looked into the eyes of his friend and said, "Whatever you desire, I will do it for you." They devised a plan. David would hide in a field during the new moon feast. Jonathan would test his father's mood and send a secret signal using arrows, so David would know whether it was safe to return or flee. Before they parted, they renewed their covenant before God. Jonathan said, "May the Lord be between you and me, and between my descendants and yours forever." It was a bond stronger than family, sealed in loyalty, trust, and divine love. The feast began, and David's seat was empty. Saul said nothing the first day, but on the second day he noticed. "Where is the son of Jesse?" Saul demanded. Jonathan answered calmly, "David asked permission to go to Bethlehem for a family sacrifice." Saul's face twisted in fury. "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman! Don't you know that as long as this son of Jesse lives, your kingdom will never be established? Send for him! He must die!" Jonathan stood, his voice trembling with anger. "Why should he be killed? What has he done?" Saul's answer came in the form of a spear, thrown at his own son. Jonathan knew then that David was right. His father would never stop until David was dead. The next morning, with sorrow weighing on his soul, Jonathan went to the field with a young servant. He shot 3 arrows far beyond him and shouted, "Isn't the arrow beyond you? Hurry, go quickly." That was the secret signal. They both knew what it meant. After the servant left, David emerged from hiding. The 2 friends embraced, both weeping. David bowed to the ground 3 times before Jonathan. Their words were few, but heavy with meaning. Jonathan said, "Go in peace, for we have sworn friendship with each other in the name of the Lord." And so they parted, Jonathan returning to the palace, David to the wilderness. And so David fled to a place called Nob, and there was a priest named Abimelech. Abimelech was afraid to meet David, as he wondered why David would travel alone, seeing as David was a famous man, dear to the king, and should have an escort of some sort. David lied and said he had urgent business to run for the king and had to be under cover, hence the travelling alone. David then asked if the priest had any bread, but the priests say they didn't have any regular bread except the one reserved for priests. Abimelech the priest said if they had stayed away from women the past 3 days, they could have the bread, and David answered saying, "Yes, women have been kept from us these past few days." Then the priest gave them the bread. Afterwards, David asked if the priest had any weapons, again claiming he didn't bring his sword or spear because he had to leave urgently to run the king's urgent errand. And the priest said, "The only sword around here is the one that belonged to Goliath, the giant you slew." And David said, There is none like it. I'll take it. But there was a man named Doeg. He was one of Saul's shepherds and still loyal to him. He would later take news of David's whereabouts to Saul. As soon as David took the sword, he fled to Achish, king of Gath. But David didn't count on being famous even in Gath. One of the servants of Achish recognized him and said, "Isn't this David, the king of the land? Didn't they sing songs of his victory and how he slayed 10,000s?" David was greatly troubled when he heard this. He immediately changed his behavior to liken that of a madman in order to throw them off. On seeing this, Achish said to his servants, "Why have you brought a madman to me? Have I any need of madmen?" David's strategy had worked, and he used this cover to flee again, and this time he fled to a cave named Adullam, where his brethren from his father's house joined him. Along with his family, other outcasts joined him, and he led them. They were about 400 men. David had become a man on the run. From cave to cave, desert to desert, he fled from Saul's relentless pursuit. But even in exile, he found men who rallied to him, discontented debtors and outcasts. Under David's leadership, they became a mighty army. In the uncertainty of this lifestyle, David went to the king of Moab and asked for his parents to stay with him till David knew what God planned for him. Meanwhile, Saul found out from Doeg where David was and what he was up to, and Saul was mad with rage. He asked his men why they never told him his son was conspiring to free David. While this interrogation was ongoing, Doeg told Saul of everything that happened between David and Abimelech the priest, how the priest gave David bread and armed him with Goliath's sword. This further infuriated King Saul, and he sent for Abimelech and the other priests. When they arrived, Saul ordered his men to slay all the priests for supporting David. But they wouldn't lay a hand on the priests, so Saul ordered Doeg to slay the priests, and he slayed over 80 people that day, including women, children, and animals. But one of Abimelech's sons escaped. His name was Abiathar. Abiathar fled towards David and told him of Saul's actions to the priests. David replied, "I knew it that day when Doeg was there that he'd tell Saul." Then David urged Abiathar to stay with him, saying, "He who seeks my life seeks yours too. Stay with me and do not be afraid. With me you'll be safe." Saul heard that David had gone to fight for Kiesh and went there to kill David, but had to leave in order to fight the Philistines instead. Yet David never raised a hand against Saul. Twice he had the chance to end Saul's life, once in a cave and once when Saul slept in his camp. But both times David said, "I will not touch the Lord's anointed." In fact, David cut a piece of Saul's cloak, but his heart struck him and he couldn't kill Saul. He said Saul was anointed of the Lord and like a father to him. David forbade his servants from raising a hand against the king, and when the king went out, David went after him and said, "My lord, the king." When Saul looked back, David bowed himself and said, "Where did you hear that I seek to do you harm? The Lord delivered you into my hand. My men convinced me, but I wouldn't kill you. Look, my father, I have a piece of your cloak in my hand, for I cut it off but would not kill my lord, the Lord's anointed. You can see that there is no evil in my hands, but you still seek my soul to kill it." David ended this by saying, "The Lord's be judge between me and thee, and avenge me of thee." And when David finished speaking these words to Saul, Saul said, "Is this thy voice, my son David?" And Saul lifted up his voice and wept. And he said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have rewarded me good, whereas I have rewarded you evil. And you have showed this day how that you have dealt well with me, for as much as when the Lord had delivered me into your hand, you didn't kill me. For if a man finds his enemy, Will he let him go well away? As a result, the Lord reward thee good for what you have done unto me this day. And now, behold, I know well that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Swear now, therefore, unto me by the Lord, that you wilt not cut off my seed after me, and that you wilt not destroy my name out of my father's house. So David swore unto Saul, and Saul went home, but David and his men gat them up unto the hold. And through it all Jonathan remained faithful. He found David one last time in the wilderness of Ziph, when David's strength was failing. Scripture says, Jonathan went to David and strengthened his hand in God. He told him, Do not be afraid. My father will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be next to you. They renewed their covenant once more before the Lord, and those would be the last words they shared face to face. The Philistines gathered again for war. Saul and his sons fought bravely on the slopes of Mount Gilboa, but the battle turned against Israel. Jonathan fell that day, alongside his brothers and his father Saul. The royal line was struck down in one blow. When word reached David, he tore his clothes and wept. His voice echoed through the hills of Ziklag as he sang, Jonathan lies slain on your high places. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You were very dear to me. Your love to me was wonderful, more wonderful than that of women. David's lament was not just for a fallen friend. It was for a brother, a kindred spirit, and a covenant that death itself could not erase. Years later, when David became king, he remembered his covenant with Jonathan. He searched for anyone left of Saul's family, asking, Is there anyone to whom I can show kindness for Jonathan's sake? And they brought him Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, lame in both feet. David restored to him all the land that belonged to Saul, and said, You shall always eat at my table. In that moment, the covenant lived on. Through mercy, through remembrance, through love that outlasted time. The story of Jonathan and David is not just about friendship. It's about loyalty that defies politics, love that conquers jealousy, and faith that holds firm even when the world collapses. Jonathan, the prince who could have clung to power, chose faithfulness. David, the warrior destined for greatness, chose honour. Together, they painted a portrait of brotherhood that still speaks today. True friendship is not about power. It's about covenant. Thank you for watching. Kindly subscribe for daily Bible storytelling videos. After the death of the great prophet Samuel, Israel mourned deeply. But while the nation wept, David, the anointed future king, was still a man on the run. Saul's jealousy burned like wildfire, and David, hunted like prey, found refuge in the wilderness of Paran, with about 600 loyal men. These were no ordinary men, warriors, survivors and fugitives, following a man after God's heart. And in those barren lands lived a very wealthy man named Nabal. Nabal, whose name literally meant fool, was from the house of Caleb, a man rich in sheep and goats, with 3,000 of one and 1,000 of the other. He was powerful but arrogant, harsh in speech, stubborn in heart. But his wife, Abigail, beautiful and wise, her words carried peace, her presence brought calm. She was everything her husband was not. Now David and his men had been living near Nabal's shepherds in the wilderness. Though they could have taken from them by force, David's men did the opposite. They protected Nabal's flocks. Not a single sheep went missing. So when it was sheep's hearing time, a festive season of feasting and celebration, David sent 10 of his men with a polite message. David, firm but respectful, said, "Go up to Nabal, greet him in my name, and say to him, 'Peace be to you, peace to your house, and peace to all that you have. We protected your shepherds in the fields. Please give whatever you can spare to your servants and to your son David.'" Nabal sat in his banquet hall, filled with laughter and wine, and when David's men delivered the message, Nabal's arrogance rose like smoke. Nabal, already drunk, laughed and said, "David? Who is David? Who is this son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who run away from their masters. Shall I take my bread, my water, and my meat for my shearers, and give it to men I do not know?" David's messengers returned, their faces dark with shame. When they told David what Nabal said, the warrior in him awoke. David was furious. He said to his men, "Strap on your swords." And 400 men mounted up. Only 200 stayed behind to guard the camp. David's anger burned. "Surely I protected this man for nothing," he muttered. "By morning, not one male in Nabal's household will be left alive." Nabal's servants whispered to Abigail, Nabal's wife, "Madam, disaster is near. David sent messengers with kind words, but your husband insulted them. David's men were good to us. They protected us day and night. Please, think of something before it's too late." Abigail's eyes widened. She wasted no time. Without a word to her husband, Abigail gathered 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, roasted grain, raisins, and cakes of figs, a feast fit for a king, and loaded them on donkeys. She rode swiftly through the mountain path, her heart pounding as she approached the ridge. David and his men appeared on the horizon, swords glinting in the sun. David muttered, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if I leave one of Nabal's men alive." Abigail dismounted from the donkey, fell to her knees before David, and said, "My lord, let the blame be on me. Please, let your servant speak. My husband is a fool, as his name suggests. Pay no attention to his insults. The Lord has restrained you from shedding blood this day. When the Lord makes you ruler over Israel, let there be no guilt or burden of blood on your conscience." The tension eased, and David's face softened. David was humbled and said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to meet me today. Blessed be your wisdom and your courage. You have kept me from bloodshed and from avenging myself with my own hands." And with that, David accepted her gifts, his anger melting away. Abigail returned home. She met her husband, Nabal, drunk, laughing, surrounded by food and wine. She waited until morning, when the wine had left him. Then she told him everything, how close death had come to his door. Nabal's heart turned to stone. The Bible says his heart died within him, and he became like a stone. And 10 days later, God struck him, and he died. David received the news in the wilderness, and he said, "Praise be to the Lord, who has upheld my cause and kept his servant from wrongdoing. The Lord has returned Nabal's evil upon his own head." And when David heard of Abigail's wisdom and courage, he sent word to her, a proposal of marriage. On hearing the proposal, Abigail bowed before David's messengers. Tears of humility flowed from her eyes. Abigail said softly, "Behold, your servant is a maid to wash the feet of the servants of my lord." And so, Abigail became David's wife, the wise woman who turned away wrath and saved her household. In a world where pride destroyed the foolish and humility preserved the wise, Abigail's courage shines like a beacon, a reminder that one act of wisdom can save countless lives and change destiny itself. After the death of Nabal, peace returned briefly to David's camp. He now had a new companion, Abigail, the woman of wisdom, whose calm spirit often steadied the heart of the future king. But peace, for David, was always temporary, because somewhere in the royal palace, Saul's jealousy still burned like an unquenchable fire. Saul, on the other hand, was pacing restlessly in his chambers with his spear in hand. Word had reached Saul that David was again hiding in the wilderness of Ziph, and once more Saul gathered his army, 3,000 chosen men of Israel, to hunt David down. David's scout whispered, "My lord, Saul's camp is just across the valley. His spear is stuck in the ground beside him, and Abner, his commander, sleeps nearby." David then said, "Who will go down with me to the camp?" Abishai stepped forward, saying, "I will go with you, my lord." The two men moved silently through the shadows as the sound of crickets filled the air. They crept through the sleeping soldiers until they stood over Saul himself, the king who wanted David dead, sleeping soundly, his spear stuck in the ground by his head. Abishai whispered, "God has delivered your enemy into your hands this night. Let me strike him once with the spear. I won't need a second blow." David answered firmly, "No, do not destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As surely as the Lord lives, he himself will strike him down, or his time will come to die. But I will not raise my hand against him." David gently took Saul's spear and his water jug. He and Abishai retreated quietly up the hill. When they reached a safe distance, David called out across the valley. David shouted, "Abner, are you not a man? Why have you not guarded your lord, the king? Look where his spear and water jug were, beside his head." Saul woke up in confusion, his eyes searching the dark. Then he heard the voice he knew too well. Saul called back, "Is that your voice, my son David?" David answered, "Yes, my lord the king." "Why do you pursue me? What evil have I done? The Lord gave you into my hands tonight, but I would not harm you. Let him judge between us, and may he see and vindicate me." Saul lowered his head. His voice trembled as he said, "I have sinned. Come back, my son David. I will not try to harm you again, because my life was precious in your eyes today. Surely I have acted foolishly and erred greatly." David, holding up the spear, said, "Here is your spear, O king. Send one of your men to come and get it." Saul's face was sorrowful but broken, and once again David spared his enemy, a man who would have killed him without hesitation. But David knew Saul's heart too well. His remorse never lasted. And so David made a painful decision to stay away from him. David and Abigail sat in their tent. Abigail said, "You've shown mercy again, my lord. But will Saul ever stop?" David, looking away, said, "I fear he never will. One day he will find me. Unless I take refuge among the Philistines, there Saul will give up searching for me." David then led his men to Gath, the land of the Philistines. Yes, David, the anointed king of Israel, became a guest among Israel's enemies. He and his men settled in the city of Ziklag, given to him by Achish, the Philistine ruler. For a time, David lived between two worlds, the wilderness of promise and the land of compromise. David led raids, protecting his people, but hiding his loyalty from Achish. David's wisdom grew sharper. He served Achish with tact, but in secret he struck down Israel's enemies, never betraying his people. And Abigail remained by his side, quiet, prayerful, and wise. Her words guided David when fear clouded his judgment. On a quiet night in Ziklag, Abigail sat beside David as he sharpened his sword, and she said, "The Lord's promises are sure, my husband. Even in exile, his word stands. Don't let despair drown the anointing." David, smiling faintly, said, "You speak with more faith than 1,000 men of war, Abigail." And she answered, "Because I've seen what your mercy can do. You spared Saul, and you spared yourself from guilt. That's the heart of a true king." And so David waited in Ziklag, a warrior in hiding, a king in waiting, guided by the hand of God and by the wisdom of the woman who had once knelt before him on a dusty mountain road. Abigail's presence was a reminder that divine destiny is not only forged by power, but by restraint, humility, and wisdom. David would soon face greater trials, betrayal, loss, and the fall of Saul himself. But through it all, the memory of Abigail's words would echo in his heart. "When the Lord has fulfilled all his promises concerning you, let there be no guilt on your conscience." Her wisdom had not just saved a household, it had preserved the heart of Israel's greatest king. Now Ziklag, the city David called home, was silent no more. Smoke rose like a dark banner into the sky. The Amalekites had struck while David and his men were away. Their wives, their sons, their daughters taken captive. Their homes burned to ashes. Even Abigail gone. David fell to his knees amid the ruins, ash in his hair, tears streaking his face. David and his men wept until they had no strength left to weep. Grief filled the air like dust, and soon grief turned into rage. A soldier shouted, "Stone him!" It was David's decision to leave. "We have lost everything." The crowd gathered stones. David trembled, not in fear, but in pain. But in his darkest hour, David turned not to the sword, but to God. David whispered with a broken voice, "Bring me the ephod." And there, among ashes and ruin, David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them?" And the Lord answered, "Pursue them, for you will surely overtake them and recover all." David mounted his horse, 400 men followed behind him, and the chase began. They rode day and night until they found a dying Egyptian slave in the wilderness, a man abandoned by his Amalekite master. He led them to the enemy's camp. Meanwhile, the Amalekite camp was filled with laughter, feasting, and captives held in chains. David waited for the right moment. Then he struck, swift and fierce. From twilight until evening of the next day, David and his men fought. And when it was over, every captive was rescued. Not one woman, not one child, not even a lamb was lost. Abigail was safe. Abigail ran into David's arms and said tearfully, "The Lord has restored all that was lost." David, breathing heavily but relieved, said, "He has indeed. His mercy never fails." Later, David divided the recovered spoils among his men, even those too exhausted to fight. David's heart was generous. He shared the spoils equally, for he knew that victory belonged to God, not to men. That day, his leadership shone brighter than ever before. Even his enemies began to respect him. At a distant battlefield, Mount Gilboa, the Israelite army collapsed under Philistine assault. But far away, another story was ending. Saul, the once mighty king, stood on the slopes of Mount Gilboa, wounded, surrounded by enemies, and out of time. Saul, gasping to his armor-bearer, said, "Draw your sword and kill me before they come and abuse me." The armor-bearer, trembling, said, "I cannot, my lord." And so Saul fell on his own sword, the mighty fallen. His sons died beside him, including Jonathan, David's beloved friend. David received the news in Ziklag. A messenger arrived with torn clothes and dust on his head to deliver the news. The messenger said, "I have escaped from the battle. Saul and Jonathan are dead." David stared in disbelief and said, "Tell me, how do you know?" And the messenger lied, claiming to have killed Saul himself. The man thought he was bringing good news, but David's heart broke like a clay jar. David said to him, fierce and sorrowful, "How dare you lift your hand against the Lord's anointed?" And he commanded that the man be struck down. For David would not rejoice over the death of Saul, nor over the loss of Jonathan, the brother of his soul. David lifted his voice and sang a lament. "The beauty of Israel is slain upon your high places. How the mighty have fallen! O daughters of Israel, weep for Saul, who clothed you in scarlet and ornaments of gold. Jonathan, my brother, your love was wonderful to me." After the morning came a new dawn. David sought the Lord again. "Shall I go up to any of the towns of Judah?" The Lord answered, "Go up." And David asked, "To which one shall I go?" The Lord said, "To Hebron." David rode into Hebron with his wives, Abigail beside him, and his men following. And there, in the city of Hebron, the men of Judah came to David and anointed him king. The waiting was over. The exile had ended. The promise of God fulfilled. David looked around, his eyes glistening as people cheered. Abigail said softly, "The Lord's word never fails." David smiled and said, "No, it only waits for its time." From the ashes of Ziklag to the throne of Hebron, David's story was one of pain, patience, and purpose. And beside him, through it all, the woman whose wisdom once saved his soul. Abigail, the quiet queen of faith, whose counsel helped shape the heart of Israel's greatest king. Her story reminds us, greatness isn't forged in palaces, but in the wilderness of obedience. Thank you for watching. The battlefield lay silent. The swords had stopped clashing, and news of death travelled faster than the wind. A messenger rode through the wilderness, his garments torn, his face pale with dread. In his hands he carried the crown of a fallen king. David looked up, his heart already heavy with sorrow. "How do you know Saul and Jonathan are dead?" he asked, voice trembling. The man told his story, and as the words fell, so did David's tears. He tore his clothes and fell to the ground. The man who had once hunted him, dead. The friend who loved him like a brother, gone. David wept till the night turned to dawn, not with joy that his enemy was gone, but with grief for a nation and a family once united. The dust of mourning still clung to him, but David did not rush into power. He knelt, lifted his eyes, and whispered, "Lord, shall I go up to any of the cities of Judah?" And God answered, "Go up." "Where, Lord?" "To Hebron." So David obeyed. With his wives Ahinoam and Abigail, his men and their families, they journeyed to Hebron. Not with chariots of gold, but with hearts of faith. And there, under the open sky, the elders of Judah came forth. They brought oil, the same sacred symbol once poured upon his head by Samuel. They anointed him King of Judah. But little did David know. In the north, Saul's commander, Abner, was not ready to let go of power. He crowned Saul's son, Ishbosheth, king over Israel. Ishbosheth was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel. David was king of Judah, which is only one tribe out of 12 tribes of Israel. And so, 2 kings rose over one nation, one chosen by men, the other chosen by God. The kingdom was divided, and the whispers of war began to stir once more. Tension grew between the houses of David and Saul, as David's house grew, but Saul's house did not. David welcomed sons with his 6 wives, and the children were Amnon, Chileab, Absalom, Adonijah, Shephatiah, and Ithream. They were all born in Hebron. Now Saul had a concubine, and Ishbosheth, the king of Israel and son of Saul, provoked Abner, his father's army commander, by accusing him of lying with her. This caused a rift between them. Abner, the strongest ally to the house of Saul, sent messengers to David, offering his allegiance. He offered to hand over Israel to David, and David said, "I will align with you, but you shall not see my face until you bring my wife Michal to me." Michal was David's first wife. Saul found out she loved David, and was all too happy to betroth her to him for a price. Not the regular dowry you'd imagine, because David was a lowly shepherd compared to a princess. Saul had said to him, "I don't want your money. I would prefer you fight and win all my battles with the Philistines in exchange for my daughter's hand." And David delivered 100 foreskins of Philistines and took his wife. But when Saul started hunting David to kill him, his wife, Michal, helped him escape through the window, and they never saw each other since. Saul later gave his daughter Michal to a man named Phaltiel to wife after David ran away. But now David was free of Saul and wanted his wife back, so Ishbosheth took her from Phaltiel to give back to David. Phaltiel followed Ishbosheth, crying because they took his wife, but was asked to go back, and he eventually did. When his 20-man escort came to Hebron, David threw them a feast. Then Abner sought to travel in a bid to convince all of Israel to be on David's side as king, and David sent him away, and he went in peace. But Joab, one of David's servants, returned from pursuing a troop, and he was angry. He said to David, "Don't you know that Abner came to deceive you? He wants to know your going out, your coming in, and all your doings." Joab then proceeded to send messengers after Abner, and they brought him back to Hebron without David's knowledge. When Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside to talk to him privately, but had other motives. Joab killed Abner to avenge his brother Asahel, whom Abner killed in battle. When David learned of this gruesome incident, he said, "The blood of Abner is on the house of Joab and his father's house, not on mine." And he mourned for Abner. Now when Saul's son, Ishbosheth, heard of Abner's death, he was shaken. When he slumbered at noon, 2 of his army commanders, Rechab and Baanah, went into his house, pretending to take wheat. They found Ishbosheth and struck him where he laid. They beheaded him and took his head to David, believing they had done him a favour, since he was the son of David's tormentor, Saul. But David reminded them that he slayed the person who claimed to have killed Saul, and would not spare anyone who killed his son either. So David cut their legs, hands and hung them. Even though Saul hunted him, David still kept faith with the house of Saul forever, especially since he and Jonathan had such a special bond. David could have seized the whole throne by force. He had the strength, the soldiers, the reason, but instead he waited. He chose the path of peace and patience, trusting God to fulfill what he had promised. Join us next time as we study the Bible together. Thank you for watching.